would have been Zimbabwe, Namibia, and other countries. But the one thing that enjoined us was that we all found base and solace in the heart of the people of Angola. And it was by no mistake that President Agostinho Neto coined his country and the hospitality of his people the firm trench of the revolution. I come from a generation of the youth of the 1980s. I left South Africa to join Umkhonto weSizwe. And at that point, I was not going to join the ANC. I was very clear I'm going to join Umkhonto weSizwe. But being a naive 17-year-old, I did not understand at that time that you had to be a member of the ANC first before you become a member of Umkhonto weSizwe. And I got pleasantly surprised that I was received very well when I left the country and found a home in the African National Congress, but was not very happy when the elders of the ANC said to me, "You'd better go to school." And I had been told by others that you are given a choice. So it was never going to be acceptable that people would say, even if they were elders, that I had to go to school. I had defied my father, who was a professor at university. I had defied my mother, who was also educated. She was a nursing sister. And I chose to be a freedom fighter. In being a freedom fighter, I was inspired by one of Africa's, and I think the world's greatest heroes, President OR Tambo. As youngsters, we listened to Radio Freedom, cuddled around a very small radio, and at that time, and please don't calculate my age on the basis of what I say, and at that time, we were using PM9 or PM10 batteries. There was no electricity in Soweto, so don't start calculating anything here. Electricity came with the ANC, so after 1994 there was electricity. I could very well have been born in 1980, so let's leave it at that. But here was this colossal, illustrious revolutionary of our times, who inspired the youth of the 60s, the youth of the 70s, the youth of the 80s. But I dare say, Ambassador, High Commissioner, he also inspired the youth of Mandela's era. He inspired everybody. And I would not be wrong, my leaders, Comrade Ben, to say that Oliver Tambo inspired the Namibian revolution too. In the same way that all our revolutions were inspired by one another. Because we had, and especially with Namibians, we had a common enemy. Our enemy was the apartheid system. It was resident in South Africa and in Namibia, unlike the other partners or revolutionary comrades and friends that we had in other liberation movements. But with this particular one, which was SWAPO and its military wing plan, we had an umbilical cord that we could not shake, whether we liked one another or not, because the enemy was one. And the one thing that President OR Tambo taught us was that the enemy, I remember when in the mid-80s, in one of his January 8 statements, he said that we must hit the hardest, make South Africa ungovernable, and hit them where it is softest. Take on the soft targets. Now, without putting it in context, OR was a very articulate revolutionary, but also an intellectual. But he was a wordsmith as well. And when you put those statements in the January 8 statement, which was beamed throughout the country through Radio Freedom and to all our bases, whether you were in Tanzania, Angola, Swaziland, or wherever, you would cuddle around that radio to listen to Radio Freedom and listen to the president giving his directives for the year. Now, on that year where he urged all of us as MK cadres and the people of South Africa to render South Africa ungovernable, he spoke about soft targets. Now, if you have 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds who are hot-headed and all they want is an AK and to kill the enemy, and newcomers who had not gone through the political drill, a soft target is any white people. All of you sitting there would have been targets. But OR quickly called us to order as we sat and deliberated and analyzed his statement. He quickly sent a message back to Angola to say, you have got it all wrong. A soft target is not based on the color of a person's skin. And he went on to explain, and I think it was the first time that he had to go out of his way to explain a January 8th statement, because we always understood his January 8th statements. And I think at that time it was because we had become so much more militant because the enemy had become so much more brutal. And you will remember the story of Andrew Zondo, who just went into a shopping mall and killed. You will remember the Magoo's bar bombing. And at that time, all we wanted was to avenge the killing of innocent men and women and children in South Africa by the killing machines of the apartheid regime. And for us, it was, okay, fine. We know that Joe Slovo is white, but he's a revolutionary white person. We know that Ronnie Castles is our commander for military intelligence. He's white, but he's different. But our target at that point in thinking, because of the anger at that time, was that now we can target white people. The ANC has always been against it. And I don't know why we thought that OR would have been saying we should kill white people, when we had been taught for so long that white people were not the enemy. The system was the enemy. So try thinking of that with 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and please don't say we had child soldiers. We were grown up at that age, even if we were not of voting age. And he called us to order, and I think he actually came to the camps to clarify that statement. And when it clarifies a statement in MK, it means it goes through all of the structures, internally and externally, of Umkhonto weSizwe. And he explained it to say, when I said you must hit the enemy where it is softest and weakest, I meant that the soft targets are the lone soldier. It is a police station in a remote area. It is a badly armed or badly manned police station. It is a military barrack where people are at their lowest in terms of guard, where they have their guard down, either sleeping or all of that. And he did not mean white people. And that is when you saw the escalation in the attacks on police stations, on military barracks, on police vehicles or military vehicles, in small convoys. It really made a hell of a lot of difference. Am I allowed to use the word hell? I'll use it anyway. It really did make that much of a difference. And whenever he spoke to the international community, we knew that he had our backs. OR never went out of his way to speak because he would speak for a few. I remember at some point he went to address I think it was the Anti-Apartheid Committee of the United Nations. And he ensured that in that delegation, SWAPO was there. And he did not only speak to the liberation of South Africa, he spoke to the liberation of the people of Namibia and the people of South Africa, who both had a common enemy. But because OR understood that the liberation of South Africa is tied by an umbilical cord to the liberation of the people of Namibia, and vice versa. I remember at a time where there were talks about Resolution 435 in the camps, and people were saying, oh, this resolution says nothing about Walvis Bay. So when we go back home, we want our Walvis Bay. Because nothing is being said by the resolution, and SWAPO is quiet about that resolution. But SWAPO had more issues to think about than a Walvis Bay. SWAPO was thinking about the bigger picture of liberating its people. And OR always said, remember that yours is to liberate, and a liberation movement is a solidarity movement. You cannot exploit weaknesses, oversights of others to advance your objective, if your objective is a revolutionary one. He made it so easy for us to sit and develop a constitution that is lauded as one of the world's best, if not the world's best. Now, today we sit back and we say, honestly, this constitution, if it is that good, why isn't everybody adopting it? But here it is. That constitution, which we all see today as one of the best, has his footprints, his fingerprints and his DNA written all over it. And it was at that time when he and other liberation movement leaders were crafting the Harare Declaration. This is my baby, if I'm not wrong. It was at that time that OR became weak in terms of his health, and he got a stroke. The one thing that we can forever thank him for is that he gave his life for all of us to have that constitution, for all of us to create a path of a value system that speaks to love for life, respect for human dignity, respect for the sovereignty of nations. I won't call Namibia Nambia.
Yeah, that's good. That's
I
good.
won't.
That's good. Good publicity.
And we had to learn about the struggles of the Vietnamese, the struggles of everybody, because OR felt that as we are recipients and beneficiaries of the kindness of the peoples of the world, we had to know who it is that we're walking along with on our path towards freedom. It was not difficult for OR to say to us, the Angolan people have given you a base to train. You have a responsibility to protect the villages of that country against UNITA. We left many bodies in unmarked graves in Angola of comrades who fought in defense of the villages of Angola. That fight between UNITA and that proxy fight between UNITA and the government of Angola was not their fight. It was a sponsored fight, and our president said, you have to defend the people of Angola. In the areas where you have camps, you have to do that. We paid the supreme price of life in helping out. But that which we paid was more than what the Angolans paid to the people of South Africa. And I dare say, my leader, to the people of your country. He reminds us, even when we reflect on his life, that when the Cubans continue to have problems, not problems developed by dictatorships, mismanagement, despotic, what is called a despotic regime, but also terrorism against the people of Cuba. We're always reminded as countries that we have to support them. When we think of the people of Palestine and the special relationship and affinity that President Tambo had with Yasser Arafat and the people of the Palestine. We have no choice but to speak out on what is happening in the Palestine. When we think of the people of the Western Sahara who continue to be colonized by another country, we can sit here and be proud that we liberated. But there's one African country that sits in the same spot that we were before the Cubans came on board to help us, the Angolans, the Russians, and whoever else paid solidarity to our struggle. We have an obligation as a people, a region, to make sure that our voice is heard through our ancestors at the United Nations, at the AU, on any platform that is afforded to our people and our governments, to speak out against the atrocities of the world. And I'm happy that my president, President Jacob Zuma, signed a memorandum, or was it an agreement, on the non-proliferation of nuclear arms. We're sitting here, and maybe some of you sitting in the audience, know too well how devastating war is. And we only know it from guerrilla warfare. We read about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We read about the First and the Second World Wars. Nobody will live to read about a Third World War, a nuclear war. And remember, he was one of the proponents of the SALT Treaty and many other treaties on anti-ballistic missiles, long-range anti-ballistic. OR was a man of peace. And if peace had to come through the armed struggle, he supported it. But he was basically a man of peace. OR listened to Beethoven, he listened to Mozart, he listened to Tchaikovsky. OR listened to African traditional music, Istatamia. He loved African cultural dance. He loved African literature. And this is what we are about today in celebrating the heritage of the people of South Africa. Our heritage is about the arts that we produce, the beautiful clothes that we wear. Our heritage and legacy is about our struggle and the solidarity and what links us with the rest of the continent and the world. Our heritage is about our languages. And I'm here today coming to a meeting Monday and Tuesday to discuss with my SADC counterparts on the preservation of our languages because we own the broadcasting services. This is all about history, heritage, and the culture of our people. But one of the things we'll be discussing on Monday and Tuesday is how do we link these cultures within the SADC region? But how do we take it further? America sells its culture to all of us. Why don't we sell our culture to the United States? Through song, through dance, through the content that we produce for television and radio, and that's what we're going to be deliberating over. And all of that is on the back of those leaders like President OR Tambo, who taught us to be proud and to love ourselves. People like Steve Biko, who was killed at a very young age, but his life, his vision, and just his being resonates with all of us as black people. But it also resonates with those who are not black, who identify with the various countries to which they belong. Those who are white and are Namibian, those who are South Africans and are white. We all are linked with that ancestral bond and cord of those that fought for us to sit in plush offices and in plush conference centers to actually talk about who we are. A few years ago, you wouldn't be sitting here talking about your heritage, culture, and history. Your history was distorted in the first place, so you probably would not even know what your history is, except if it is told by your grandfather, your great-grandparents, and it is, given down in that way. But it wasn't in history books. The history of the women who led this continent. And I can tell you, you look for history books, very few women are spoken about. But you will see them in the footnotes of these history books that we read. Those women are our help. Because out of that, we become better when we know who we are and where we come from. That is what OR Tambo did. When he came to the camps to visit us, we would always ensure that we practice at least 2 weeks before, at the very least 2 weeks before, because he demanded a cultural evening when you got to the camp. I'm sure in your time when you trained, it was the same. When I trained, I know for a fact it was the same. Even for those that trained after me, OR was very big on heritage, culture, language, and history. So we would all form ourselves into small little groups. I used to sing in the camp. I didn't have a very good voice, but hey, I sang because I was confident. Others danced. They did all sorts of African cultural dances that we have in South Africa. You learned as you go because for those who came from the township, you knew very little about the dances of your people. So we learned in the process. It was not just about guns and political education. It was also about our history and also our culture and our heritage. We speak of people who have brought us all to where we are today. And our responsibility now is to ensure that that which OR did for 30 years with other leaders in prison and kept the ANC together and intact and ensured the fraternal relations with other parties in the continent who liberation movements were nurtured is what we need to do today. We should never fight between South Africa and Namibia. We should always speak with one voice when it comes to solidarity because we are beneficiaries of the kindness of the peoples of the world. That we should never forget. There were anti-apartheid movements all over the world. They did not do that because they were bored, they didn't have jobs, They did that because they believed that we had to be liberated. And we owe it not only to our people, but those people of the anti-apartheid movement to ensure that in governance we do our best to show people that we are grateful for what they put for us to be in office and to be in power. This freedom, not today, not tomorrow, should we ever take it for granted. Because it's very easy for us to lose it. And when we lose it, and I always say to comrades that the ANC was not the only vehicle to which our people got their liberation, but it formed the major part of that liberation of our people. If you look at the various documents of the ANC, everybody lauds our policies, but we're very short on implementation. Maybe let me also not say very short. We are short on implementation. Now, if an ANC government loses power today, I would feel very guilty because our people's hopes and aspirations live in the documents that were put together over many months, many years, written in blood and written with sweat and tears of those that left this liberation for us. And I can say the same for SWAPO. I can say the same for the MPLA. I can say the same for all of these liberation movements. That you really have to make sure that as you govern in a manner that it's not everybody's going to be happy, but at least make fewer people unhappy in the way that you do things. The last thing that we should all be talking about is that there's corruption in our systems. Why should there be corruption in our systems? To the scale at which it is in a lot of countries. We should be talking about the fact that it's very difficult to practice fraud and corruption in our governments because we are liberators. How do we continue to say we are liberators when we are snatching from our people the very liberation in our deeds, in our behavior? OR stood for better than some of us do today. And it is our responsibility, all of us, you in the audience, here, me sitting with the leaders, to make sure that that history is not tarnished by the ills of today's world, by the ills of today's politics. I grew up in the ANC, and when people would say politics are dirty, I would say, no, it's not true. I'm not in the ANC. But today, when people say politics are dirty, just keep quiet. It's different. It's a world that has evolved, and it doesn't look like it did during President OR's time. It doesn't look the way that it did during Comrade Samora Machel's time, during Comrade Joshua Nkomo's time. It doesn't look the same. Agostino Neto never gave us his country as a firm trench of the revolution for us to betray our people. Let us do what it is that we liberated our people for. Let us ensure that with the political emancipation that we have, let us ensure that we go beyond that and fight now for economic emancipation of our people. And that is what OR would have wanted us to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Panel working on that aspect of history, and I think some of the issues that actually bring our two countries together, the geographical location of our two countries, we share a dream. We want to hear from the Vice President and the Acting President of the Republic. We are warmly welcoming you, and the significance that the Namibia and the rest of Southern Opacity as a former student.
Thank you, Honorable. A short introduction to what I know of the great men we are speaking about here, about his legacy. This panel discussion to celebrate and explore the life and character and the legacy of Comrade OR Tambo, or OR as fondly known by many comrades, is a living history today, a living history tomorrow, a living history for us to pass to our children when we are honest to what we went through as part of our revolution. First, I was saying the South African fascist troops that time, they did not learn anything really right from the beginning, and things could have not been so made difficult. I think you remember that they were driven first out of Angola when they tried to come and interfere there in 1974 by the Cubans, literally crossing the Kunene River back to the then Southwest Africa. And it was hoped they will never come back again, only to regroup later. But of course, as we all know, the final running of them from Angola was from Quito Kwanevala, which they never repeated again. And that again was the combined forces of the liberation movement, the Cuban Internationalists. And of course, we have reached that point since, because leaders who were inspiring us to forge on, countries that were supporting us, Angola as a country that was our fortitude, say it's up to you, don't give up, it's your right. but we Cubans, we are ready to be with you to the bitter end. Thanks. That has happened. Here we are today. Today, as we reflect on the life and the legacy of Oliver Reginald Tambo, their quintessential liberation hero from Southern Africa. I'm not even saying from South Africa, from Southern Africa. The Commander-in-Chief of the booty, Papa, and so forth. We humility, fortitude, character, intellectualism, Africanism, yet an internationalist par excellence. That was Oliver Tambo. A pragmatist, a tactical occupant, visionary reader, and extraordinary work ethos. Indeed, he was a man completely sold out to the cause of African liberation, even at the personal expenses, to his own personal injuries, to his families and his friends. He was committed. Truly, one can say that Comrade OR, who formed the clue of the African National Congress for over 30 years, during which it was difficult years, was a montage portrait. In a literary sense, he was a little bit of something to all of us, to the people of South Africa, to the people of Namibia, and indeed to the people of the whole world. Those who knew him, heard about him, and associated with what he stood for. Among us today are seated here other comrades who could have been here, but I'm happy to say Honorable Theo Beni Gurira is here, who used to be referred the Lion of Africa then at the United Nations. I think it's because of the beard he used to wear. And everybody said, you cannot face that one. These comrades, these leaders, who were close associates, comrades in arms, with Oliver, they sat with him, they discussed with him strategies, they dined with him, reasoned with him, tete-a-tete with him, and hence and his own person that he and humanity as a whole. African liberation icon. Beyond the plight of South Africans, extending solidarity to Africans all over the world, those who were suffering under colonialism. Innocent Namibians who were protesting from all locations to Katutura on December 10th, 1959. It was Comrade OR traveled to Windhoek in 1959 to express his solidarity with the oppressed Namibian people by offering free legal services to them. Such was the character of the great man we are speaking about. He was doing so through his good conscience. Wow. Not to stand by, he could not observe while injustice was committed against innocent people, whose only offense was their demand for justice and fair treatment in their own country. However, the South African colonial authorities, as we learned earlier, could not have it. They detained him and deported him the next day. He was deported. He arrived, kept and deported from the Eros airport, which is just close to us here. Such was a man, fearless as he was. In appreciation of his gallantry and readiness to side with oppressed Namibians, and as a sign of unbreakable bonds of friendship between the oppressed people of Namibia and others, and of course, of his own people in South Africa. The Republic of Namibia, in March 2010, honored him with a posthumous national award. We cannot forget him. I personally did not have really many encounters with him. I was not privileged to dine and strategize with him. But I met him, I knew him, I listened to him, but what I did for what he has taught us to do was at the time when it was decided that South African goods must be boycotted, particularly South African origins. I was in the Scandinavian countries. And there, the understanding of the Southern African liberation scenery, it's not a secret. It was born by the student and trade union first. Politicians were aloof of that situation because they were enjoying trading with South Africa. But when orange boycott came and other goods, I tell you, you should have come there and see a scenery. As the ship were offloading orange onto the shore, we students were there with showers or throwing the orange in the sea. It was chaos. It was chaos. But in the end, I can tell you, people like OR, Sam Nujoma and others, they will come to the Scandinavian countries those days, they will receive by no any single politician, not even leaders or political leaders, but by the student leaders and leaders of the trade union. But when we come closer to the middle of 80, things have changed. These leaders could come and be received because it was now clear. They were fighting the impossibility.
The writing was on the wall.
The writing was on the wall. They better change immediately. To the point that when 435 was muted about and discussed about, no, those countries were, I can tell you, were one of our best European friends, together with some Central European friends, particularly the Dutch people and everywhere there. So those were, I tell you, a wonderful, wonderful experience of human solidarity when people were working. And the South Africans were isolated. I remember even several meetings where the South Africans were also there as a delegate. As we come in, and as members of the delegation were introduced, they start walking out. That was a difference. Comrade and friend, though he has gone to join his heroic leaders, such as Chris Hani, Peter Nanyemba, Ernst Che Guevara, the list is long. But his revolutionary spirit and the visionary mindset still urged us to go on fighting, because there is a lot of injustice in the world today. If we relent, history will blame us. We should emulate what he taught us. And his work finally paid off. Of course, when in 1994, a democratic and non-racial South Africa was created. And it's there, alive, free politically, and will free also economically. And that is what we wish for the rest of the world, those that are oppressed, such as Western Sahara and the people of Palestine. I thank you.
In terms of what he stood for, and overall wishes. And finally, on the 18th December, with my two South African President Sam Nujoma included me in the Namibian delegation that went to South Africa to represent the country as we finally put OR for his burial. You know, there are rare events, opportunities like that, where you get to know a person from that early age until I had few gray hair and so forth. So we are talking about somebody whom we have known, not only known, but loved and respected. A father figure. When he speaks, we listen. An extremely kind and always a pleasure to talk to him. If he knows you and you do not venture in to come and greet him because of protocol problems, he will seek you out and say, why are you not coming forward? And of course, you would never tell him the truth. You would simply say, well, Mr. President, I was waiting for you to have a moment so that I can come and pay my respect. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have attempted, in a very short time, we cannot say everything, we cannot cover all aspects, but I think we have reflected on his legacy, his contribution that paved the way for a brighter Africa as we now see the rest of the Southern African countries are finally liberated. And we're also saying with conviction when we say his footprint will live with us forever. That said and done, as I picked up from my dear colleague.
I'm writing it down somewhere. Or was it you, moderator? You had a few quotes about OR. And the
presence of my vice president, also currently president, my elder, my former minister.
Deal specifically with these issues, as I said.
And between Namibia and South Africa, I think we have a huge task ahead of us. So exactly what you said today is what you're going to say in the meeting on Monday.
Wonderful.
I would just like to take us back to when I first met Dlodlo, 8 years ago.
For change. And the relationship between the two countries and between the two governing political parties, SWAPO and the ANC, were shaped by the liberation struggle. If we didn't know each other way back, we were able to discover each other and work together for the common good of our two respective countries. Other footprints we are talking about, it is OR himself, a father figure to many of us, a comrade in arms. But again, what set him out among many people of his generation is the fact that he was an extraordinary person, a good listener, patient, and willingness to give you the ear as a younger person, and very inviting basically almost like a teacher. What he did to me personally and to many people I know of my generation, I remember the late Moses Gawe recalling his encounter with OR in Cairo, in Egypt. And his experiences were essentially identical to my own. So we all had our moments with him, and there are not many leaders you can characterize like that. That's my take.
Yeah, let me add quickly. I will only add very briefly. As we are writing the history of the liberation of Namibia today, that history started in 1959, and that torch for the starting of the liberation movement was when our people were massacred. And here is a young lawyer at his own who offered to come and defend the people of this country, not to be paid a cent, but because he believed in the conviction of what they have decided to say, enough is enough. And in the old location there, those grave of the people that were massacred during that time, and those that were wounded and ill and succumbed later, they are there today. And we cannot separate those graves in that hall happening, the start of the revolution for the liberation of Namibia. He is one of those who led the torch for our liberation. Thank you.